Welcome to Formed, where each week we navigate a relevant topic or question through honest conversations. We are three pastors with three different backgrounds on staff together at Irving Bible Church in Irving, Texas. We believe we are constantly being formed in the way of Jesus for the sake of the world, and we hope this podcast helps with that. So let's jump into this week's episode of Formed. Welcome back to another week of Formed, and we're back and at it.
Here we are.
We're what, 2 weeks from Thanksgiving?
It's crazy.
Wow.
Yeah, I think that's
suppose
right.
So.
Are you ready for
This year has just flown by, like the fastest year that I can recall.
Yeah.
I mean, crazy how fast it's flown by.
I just want it to be consistently cold. That's all I want.
That would be very nice.
But we live in Dallas.
Yeah, exactly.
I know.
Yeah.
It's
Keep
always
wishing.
hot. It's still better than New Jersey.
You're rocking
It's
your
not.
Cuppa hat. I
It
love
is
the
not.
Cuppa hat.
It
Representing
is
Cuppa.
beautiful right now in New Jersey. Fall foliage.
That's
not what this episode's
People
about.
don't know what it.
Keep going.
We're in the midst of a sermon series here at our church called Let's Talk About It.
Let's talk about it.
If you've been listening over the past few weeks, then you know this podcast has been as a supplement kind of to the sermon series and taking questions from people in the room, but some people submitting questions that are not in the room too about each of the subjects each week. And this past week, we kind of took a little shift, a little detour, changed up something, and we went with the topic of civility. And Sissy's message was just absolutely incredible.
Fantastic.
A message is good when you start getting some texts in the room like, dude, are you in here? Are you in the room right now? Are you listening to this? And so
My mom? Was my mom texting you?
It was not. It was not. But if you missed that message, you can go to our YouTube channel and check that message there.
That's really great.
But why the shift? This is for both of you here.
Yeah.
Why the shift? Why did we change up the topic for the Sunday and go with civility?
So we were originally going to talk about work, which I had wanted to, when Barry, sent us the sermon overview and we talked about it. I really wanted to talk about work. I think it's a really important topic, especially as we think about what impacts our everyday lives. And then I think it was about maybe 4 weeks out, we started talking like, is that the right topic, the Sunday after the election?
Mm-hmm.
And so as we started to see just more and more what was transpiring in our country related to the election and the hostility and just even some of the things that were going on between our candidates and all of that, we just felt like we don't know what's going to happen, but it feels like it's a great topic, but not the appropriate topic for that week. Yeah. So process together, and you actually came up with the idea of civility. What if we talked about this? I thought more about it. I'm like, that's exactly right, because that's really the problem that we need to address is how do we learn to disagree with one another? And seeing what was going on, particularly seeing Christians responding in these ways with those that they disagree with, felt like this would be most helpful to our people in this moment.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, we planned the sermon series months in advance. And as I was kind of mapping out the series, I was thinking much more in terms of topics than I was about specific dates. And so I wasn't necessarily really concentrating at the time on, okay, this is the Sunday after a really significant election. And as we got closer to it, there was just the recognition, like, things could be pretty chaotic. Things could get bad. And especially, as you think about post January 6, 2021, post 2 different assassination attempts, like just facing the very real possibility that you could see protests, rioting, political violence. Who knows? And the prospect of thinking about that in the lead up to it was just a little bit disturbing. And then the idea of, like, if things go badly and we're going to come together and talk about work, it just didn't seem like that was the right thing for the right moment. And so we kind of talked about some sort of contingency plans of like, okay, Sissy could write a sermon about work and I could be ready to step in if sort of things went a bit, a different direction. And still, even with a little bit of sense of like, had things gone really badly last week, I would have probably stepped in and kind of gone there. And yet maybe we just needed to rethink what that week was really focused on, to say, is there a message from the scriptures that brings God's word to bear in a timely way on what we're walking through as a nation? And I just thought Sissy did that remarkably well. This passage from Romans chapter 12, that is, so here you have the word of God written for particular people at a particular time in a particular setting, the church at Rome and the center of of power, of politics, of economics in the ancient Western world, and you have this kind of fledgling multi-ethnic church trying to figure out how do we be faithful to the way of Jesus in the midst of this cultural environment. And that word of God to the church at Rome, so remarkably timely for the Church of God in North America today. So timely, I believe, for Irving Bible Church here in North America today, that speaks to the way that we relate to one another and we relate to our neighbors around us. In some, I think, really important ways that largely have been lost, that our ability to engage across differences, particularly political differences, in a way that is civil, in a way that is honoring, that's just been undermined. We tend to otherize and vilify those with whom we disagree. And I don't think we're going to make progress until we figure out a different way to engage.
How to do that, yeah.
I know, Sissy, you might want to add to this. I had this as a question, and Barry stepped into the question here about, like, how could we learn from the church in Rome during that time?
Yeah.
Is there anything you want to add to that? I know that was a key part of your message on Sunday, but to Barry's point, I just thought it related so well to where we're at today.
Yeah, I mean, you think, as you said, Paul's writing to this specific church, but you look at what they were experiencing. They're this divided community. So initially mostly Jewish believers, and then the Claudius, the emperor, kicks the Jews out in 49 AD. They return a few years later. But by that time, in those intervening years, the Gentile Christians had now shaped the culture of the church. And so the Jewish believers come back, and they're with the Gentile believers, and they're trying to figure out, how do we do this? How do we live as this multi-ethnic community with all our differences? And so this is the church that Paul's writing to. Again, right, they're at the center of political, social, economic power in this divided community. How do we live in unity? What is our identity? And then how do we live faithfully to Jesus under Roman rule? And very much applicable to us today. And Paul really calls them to be united in their faith in Jesus Christ, that the power of the gospel is what brings them together. And so how do they live at peace? In Romans 14, Paul talks about maintain that peace. And so it's about mutual respect and honoring one another in spite of your differences. And I wouldn't even say in spite of your differences, seeing your differences as really part of the beauty of what God is doing in you. Right, exactly. Enriches what God is doing there. And so that's really what Paul is advocating for, and much of what we talk about for our church and our context as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is just yet another example of what we've really been on about in a lot of ways over the last few years as a church, committing to become a more fully multi-ethnic, multicultural church. And that's not something that's some kind of contemporary agenda that we're importing into the life of the church. It's something that has been a part of the life of the church from the very beginning. That Scott McKnight has a wonderful book about the epistle to the Romans called Reading Romans Backwards. And he highlights the fact that so much of what Paul is addressing at the end of the book, the last few chapters of the book, that are the most neglected by churches and scholars in many respects, but that all has really to do with this tension that they're trying to figure out how to navigate between Jews and Gentiles in the church and in the church at Rome. And that by his idea of reading Romans backwards is recognizing this is the problem that the letter is ultimately aimed to address. So all of that rich theology at the beginning is all aimed towards addressing these real practical ecclesial concerns at the end that really have to do with how do we navigate ethnic and cultural difference in the life of the church. And that's one of those places, once again, as I've suggested, when you start to see the multi-ethnic vision of God, and you see it particularly in the pages of the New Testament, although it's there from Genesis to Revelation, but you start to see it on the pages of the New Testament, and you can't unsee it, because once you see it, you start to see it everywhere. It's just that we really haven't been taught to see it. And so once it's highlighted, once it's pointed out, then what you find is it's everywhere. The book of Romans is a treatise that is ultimately about learning how to live together in multi-ethnic, multicultural community as a church.
One of the cool things about this series is, we're taking questions from people, and whether it's on a Sunday or not on a Sunday, you can submit a question by going to our website, irvingbible.org/let's talk about it. And we have a webpage for the series, and you can submit your question there. And one of the questions we got in for this week was, how does this topic of civility, how does it apply if I don't vote and I don't partake in this political season?
What I would say is we disagree on a number of issues, right? So there's other areas of disagreement. I mean, I think politics rises to the surface because that's really where we see it right now. But we have theological differences. We have differences related to social issues. And so I think this is something that as a culture, we need to almost relearn because we've gotten to this place where you're right, I'm wrong. And if you don't think the way I think, then you must be bad. Right? It's the idea of otherizing, demonizing, and all of that. And so whether it's politics or theology or, whatever it is, issues where we disagree, how do we lovingly and respectfully learn to have conversations, engage with one another in ways that really do reflect the self-giving love of Jesus to the world? Because I think that's the difference that Christians can make right now in this moment. I really do believe we have such an opportunity, and my fear is we're going to miss it because of how we're really not acting that differently from the rest of the world.
Why do you think we've it's gotten that extreme to where, Sissy mentioned this on Sunday, to where it's we don't just disagree anymore? It feels like it turns deeper into character, into question, all these extreme things about people. Why is it gotten that way, particularly for parties, the two parties in America, but also just in general? It feels like it's so extreme now.
Yeah, I mean, I have what may be a little bit of a cynical answer to that question, but I actually think it's money. Because we talked a while back about this change that took place, and I'm going to blank on the particular kind of tenet of communication media. Oh goodness, I talked about it a couple episodes ago, but the policy that used to be fair time of if one side gets to articulate their position on radio or television, then you have to give equal time to the other side to articulate their position. And so there was always this striving in communication media to try to give equal time to remain, impartial and balanced. And that went out in the late 1980s, I think around 1988, 89, so that then you get the rise of what we might think of as more ideologically driven media. And so you start getting expressions of communication media, radio, talk radio, television, news, that are now much more polarized in their coverage of what's happening. And we should always just remember that whether it's radio waves or television feeds, those are at the end of the day commercial opportunities, right? They're about making money. And the way you make money is gaining attention through fear and anger. And so again, you go back to the late 80s, early 90s, and you start to see the rise of these expressions of political media that are very angry and very much about promoting fear of the other. And you get people that just get immersed in that over time. And the kind of rhetoric that starts out in television or radio starts actually getting adopted by our politicians. And then that's the way in which people begin to engage with one another. And sometimes in ways that, previous generations, you just never would have talked to or about other people in that kind of way. But it becomes normalized to have that really bitter, contentious, divisive kind of approach to the way that we engage one another.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I think then also what Ad said is we have these mediums where we're not face-to-face. It becomes much easier to do that.
That's right. Yep.
I think the other part of it is I think there's, and this is an age-old issue. We see it throughout the scriptures. I think the problem is idolatry. That when you criticize my party, you criticize me. You criticize my values, my vision, my way of seeing the world, my understanding of God. And so there isn't a place for healthy disagreement, because now to criticize my party is to criticize my very person, is to criticize my identity, because my identity and my party have become
kind of tribalism.
one. Yes.
Yeah.
So I think that's a lot of what's going on. And it's become so ingrained in our minds that you must hate the members of the opposing party because they are absolutely and totally against you as a person.
Yeah. And to your point, even, with social media, especially, we get more and more fed stuff that agrees with our existing convictions and biases. And so there's that echo chamber. And then it's everybody who thinks like me talks like this, right? About them. And so it becomes normalized to vilify the other. Again, on whichever sort of side of the issues you're wanting to talk about, that becomes a normal way for us to think about and talk about the other. And then when we engage with people that we actually disagree with, we do so mediated through these screens where, again, we'll say things. I mean, some of the stuff, especially, you see it a lot of times with online accounts that don't put their own name or don't put their own profile picture on there. So you have these people who are completely anonymous who can just say the most atrocious things that you'd never say if you're sitting down with somebody looking them in the eye.
So this question, it's kind of loaded because there's so many different angles you could take to this, but how do you ride the balance of respecting differing beliefs and also the speaking a truth that someone might need to hear?
That's a good question.
Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. And I wish there was just do these three things.
Right.
And
There's a nice calculus.
What's the easy answer? Come on.
Easy roadmap, but there isn't. So one, I do think it is this, the word balance is a good one, is it's this tension between doing both. So how do I stay open, empathetic, humble, be willing to listen to the other person, and so be willing to hear them out, and yet think about what is that opportunity, really have that discernment to consider what is the opportunity where I do need to speak the truth in love. What I have found helpful in doing that is to, one, is really inviting the Spirit into that conversation. And so always praying, because I am going to mess that up. And so I'm constantly like, Lord, where is the place that I speak into this, and how do I do this in a way that is going to be, the other person is going to be able to receive it the best. So that's one thing. But then secondly, asking the person, can I share my thoughts with you? Because then it's more invitational, instead of feeling like I am now forcing my opinion on you, and it could almost be, they can receive it as condescending, and making them feel inferior in some way. But by asking the question, I think it helps invite a little bit of more of a dialogue. And so then having that opportunity to share. And then there's sometimes where it just might not be the right moment to speak the truth in love. And I might have to demonstrate that truth in love. And knowing when to do that and when not to is really the hard part.
I go back to the book of Proverbs, right? In the Proverbs, you get, in one instance, answer a fool according to his folly. And then you get, don't answer a fool according to his folly, right? Which seems like just a blatant contradiction right there in the scriptures. And yet the whole point of putting those two statements in there is there's sometimes which the right answer is to do the one. There's sometimes where it's the right answer is to do the other. And it's the trick is wisdom to know the difference, right? Which one is which. Sometimes a person is foolish, and you need to call them out and correct them, or lovingly challenge them, or engage them in a way that might actually help them see the reality of their foolishness. Sometimes people are so foolish they're not going to be able to see it, and the more you try, the more you engage, the worse it's going to get. You're just going to sort of dig a hole. You're going to create an offense or a barrier, and so it's not going to get anywhere productive. And wisdom is knowing when to. Right. And I think even when it comes to our political discussions, or when it comes to online engagement, like when to just say, I'm going to let that go. Right. I'm going to allow that person just to be wrong. I think they're wrong. I don't need to tell them they're wrong. They're just going to be wrong. And just, sit there in your wrongness and be wrong. Right. And other times it's, no, actually, I think we need to have a conversation about this. And I want to, I want to challenge you. I want to do it in a way that's loving. And so part of it is even knowing ourselves. Like, are we able to engage in a way that's loving? Are we able to engage from a place where we're not in the red zone, where my ego's on the line?
Yeah.
But, I had I think about a conversation not long ago with somebody that I dearly love, that we see some things pretty fundamentally differently. But we had a really great conversation because I was able to engage it with that curiosity and listening, and also like to be bold to challenge things that were said, but not in a way where I felt like my sense of identity or my ego was somehow at stake. And we just had this really good conversation. We didn't walk away, either one of us, kind of changing our mind through the course of it. But it was one of the more, I think, just like this sort of intellectually rigorous, fun, and yet also weighty, kind of political discussions.
Barry's like, Dallas Willard says. Okay, so Thanksgiving obviously is coming up. Mentioned it earlier. There's going to be some people that are listening that are legitimately dreading a family get-together or with friends, because there is that one person that feels super strong on one side, and it's just like polar opposite views, and it's like destiny that is going to be talked about there at that gathering.
Yeah.
What is the advice that you have for that listener going into that type of setting?
Answer a fool according to his folly. Don't answer a fool according to his folly.
Quote Proverbs. Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, I mean, that's
part of it.
Part
Yeah.
of it, right?
Yeah.
Is like, okay, is Thanksgiving dinner the time for me to take a stand against this, person that's spouting off stuff that I really disagree with? Is now the time just to let it go?
Yeah.
Or maybe it's not. I mean, maybe there needs to be challenge. And so figuring out how to navigate that is absolutely tricky, and there isn't a calculus, and making it, connected to Thanksgiving and this kind of family experience, that's a bummer. But yeah, I don't know. Do you have great advice?
I mean, I would say the same thing. It's discerning, like, is this really the moment to have this conversation? And to your point, it could be, but sometimes it's not, and then trying to navigate that. But I think if it is, then, going back to being willing to really listen to them. And a lot of times this is just one of my challenges, is to listen, not in preparation to make my defense or prove them wrong or persuade them to think like me, but to listen so I might understand them. And that actually for me has been really impactful, because I'm really trying to understand, why do you think like that?
No.
What has happened in your life? What have you experienced that is making you see the world very differently from the way I see the world? And sometimes, like, especially in your family, when maybe you did have very similar upbringings, there could be something that, like, oh, that makes sense now. Yeah. You experienced that. That is not something I experienced. And now I can have a little bit more empathy. I may still disagree with you, but I can understand better. So being curious in that way, asking those questions. The other thing for me, and this is Enneagram 8, I always have to watch my tone. And it's a little bit of like, the self-awareness is important. What's going on in me?
Inside of me.
Because if I'm in the red zone, there's no way I should be talking about this. It's never going to work out well. And then even if I'm not, I always have to watch my tone, because my excited tone and my angry tone can be the same. I'm like, I'm not angry, I'm just excited. So kind of being aware of how you can be perceived, because that alone, depending on someone's personality, can be off-putting, can feel like you're being aggressive in that way. And then I think the third thing, especially for something like Thanksgiving, is to try to move it to, where do you have common ground? So what do you agree on? What are shared values, goals, experiences that you can say, okay, let's move from this and talk about this thing that we actually can agree on and do have something in common.
So we all agree the Cowboys are horrible.
We could agree on that. That is like, see, there you go. Yeah.
No, it's like, what's the cost of like winning an argument? You talked a little about arguing and all of that. And it's like, how many people's opinions have been changed at that moment at the Thanksgiving table?
Probably not too many. So that's that spiritual discipline of allowing someone else to be wrong and not feeling like you have to have the last word. I mean, you alluded to the great Dallas Willard, so I'll remember a story that happened. Dallas Willard taught philosophy at the University of Southern California for decades. And there was a time that he had, done this lecture, and at the end of the class, this young college student challenges him on stuff that he's been saying through this lecture in a way that there's a Christian student who's sitting in the room watching this whole thing play out, and this guy's just like insulting in the way that he's challenging Dr. Willard and what he's presented, and this Christian student is going, "Oh, I know." I'm like, he's sitting on the edge of his seat waiting for Willard to sort of put him in his place, and because I know that he can just eviscerate the whole argument that this student has just made, and the student finishes up and he just says, "Okay, thank you all for being here. We'll see you next time," and he just ends right. He doesn't.
This is what Barry does to all of us.
And so this student goes up to him and it's like, "Dr. Willard, like why didn't you tell him?" And he's like, "I'm practicing the discipline of the spiritual discipline of not having to have the last word." Like, whew,
that's good.
I don't know about that spiritual discipline in my life. I'm not
good.
sure.
Yeah.
But yep.
That's what Barry could eviscerate all of us. And he just like looks at us and laughs at us.
Every once in a while you get eviscerated, right? No, I hope not.
Okay. Well, thanks for submitting questions. Thanks for, throwing those questions at us for us to talk about. And we have a couple more weeks of this and a new subject coming up this Sunday that you can submit questions for, both online and there in the room through the QR codes on the seats if you're in person. If you're watching online, there's a QR code on the screen, and we'll be back then. But we have to do some banter here at the end.
Some banter. Mm-hmm.
And this was time. I was talking with Barb last night, and Barb's like, it'd be cool. I'd love to know what their like death row meal is, like their last meal on earth.
Yeah, this is what you want.
What would it be if it's like you get one last meal, you got to have an appetizer, a main course, a dessert, and a drink?
Barbara's imagining us on death row, huh?
Yeah, that's what I was concerned about, Barb.
She just thinks about food a lot.
Yeah, that's good. I appreciate that.
I love it.
You want to start?
Okay, appetizer, entree, dessert, and drink. Okay, no, you go first, and I'm working it out a little bit.
Okay, I told them earlier that mine's completely.
We're probably gonna have the same stuff.
We're gonna have the same thing. You're gonna love it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, but I've thought long and hard about this. This is a question I often ask people. So my appetizer is. It's called kappa and mean curry, which is boiled tapioca. It doesn't sound good at all, right? But it's like I know amazing. What tapioca. Yeah. You know what tapioca is?
Yeah,
boiled
it's
tapioca and fish curry, and then there's like this red chili oil that you put on top of it. It's so spicy, it's incredible. Like such a great meal. I'm like salivating thinking about it. My entree would be rice, chicken curry, mango curry. So they take ripe, like just barely ripe mangoes, and they make a curry out of it, and you have like fresh chunks of mangoes. Like you eat it off the seed.
In the curry?
In the curry. Look, I'm salivating. And then like a mushroom, it's called mushroom thawed, and it's like mushrooms and coconut, grated coconut and all that. And I just love papadum, which is like a lentil wafer that you often get in Indian meals. So that would be my entree. My dessert would be, it's kind of like rice pudding. It's called samya paisam. So it's vermicelli noodles, which are like super thin noodles in like a rice pudding kind of dish, and that's just amazing. And then my drink. Yes, my drink would be like a 94. I thought 94 Camus cab.
Wow, it's got the year.
I got the year.
Oh my
94,
gosh,
like 2001.
Wow.
I like that too. Yeah.
Wait, what?
So
you have specific years.
I have specific years that I would want that vintage. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very
so
nice.
good red wine.
That's impressive.
I spent more time on this question than any
other. So good.
Actually, I didn't. Good. It's like been in the back of my mind. I got it. Yeah.
All right. Well, Barry.
All right. So
Hit
it's
that,
last
Barry.
meal. Yeah. So like I don't have to think at all about calories.
Nope. Or money.
Yeah. Or money. No. So I love appetizers. I'm having a hard time coming up with like what the appetizer would be. Like maybe you get an appetizer platter, a variety of appetizers.
Okay. Yeah.
But I do have. There's one appetizer that I have made that I really like. That's a mushroom cap that you hollow out and you cook sausage and you put it in the mushroom and it's awesome.
Good.
But I don't know.
I've done that.
I love all kind of appetizers. So maybe I'd go with a variety, a little appetizer sampler. And I was thinking I would probably like a steak, like a good ribeye.
That's what I thought you were going to say.
Although, especially as a kid, I never eat this because of calories, but I loved a good chicken fried steak when I was a kid. My grandmother made the best chicken fried steak. And so, you know what? I might have to go with chicken fried steak and mashed potatoes, but I don't know.
And the gravy?
Yeah.
Or no gravy?
Gravy, not the white gravy.
Not the
the brown gravy.
The brown gravy is that's my jam too.
And then I don't know, on the
drink?
Dessert. The drink. The drink, I would have a nice old fashioned. I didn't go so far as to think about what particular bourbon I would have in my old fashioned or what vintage it would be.
Yeah.
But I'd have an old fashioned and an unsweet tea probably. Although I might drink sweet tea since it's
unsweet
the last
tea
meal.
on your what?
Yeah, you don't need to do unsweet anymore.
I just don't need to drink the brown water.
Okay, sorry,
And
we
then
skipped dessert.
The dessert, I don't know. Again, I love all kinds of desserts. I think maybe a cheesecake with a caramel or something. I don't know.
I thought you were going to pick like a cobbler.
I could go with a good cobbler. Yeah.
Peach cobbler.
Yeah.
That's good. Well, I'm going to sound really boring with this now.
Peanut butter and jelly.
Shocking.
Yeah.
I mean, I just want some type of like good bread as an appetizer, like a Texas Roadhouse roll.
You just want a roll?
With some like
no, they're good, but
with
still.
the cinnamon
With
sugar
the cinnamon,
butter.
Okay, all right. I'm not. You're on death row. You can pick what you want.
I know.
It's death row.
Yeah.
I gotta have a good steak.
Yep, that's good.
There's this like cut at this Brazilian restaurants. It's basically like bottom sirloin, biflaujinho, and I just give me the whole thing of that. But yeah, like a good like 3 to 5 cheese macaroni and cheese with mashed potatoes.
There we go.
Just straight, just like
carbs and carbs.
Yep. And then dessert, I don't know, probably like a cheesecake, but with like strawberries.
Nice.
Strawberries like my go-to like fruit. And then to drink, a 1987 white wine. No, this drink, my favorite drink in the whole world is this drink called Ski. It's in Kentucky. It's a soft drink in Ski.
You want soda?
Yeah. If there's no, I'm about to die, so
you're just gonna drink all this?
Yeah,
Ski?
just give me a Ski.
Give me a Ski.
It is made just there in Kentucky, and it's like a Sprite, Mellow Yellow, Mountain Dew mix type of thing, but originated like right near my hometown. And I grew up going to like the plant. You could like tour the plant and get like a little fresh cup as a kid and all the stuff. And
it's like Kentucky's Dr. Pepper.
Yeah, Coke bought it out, so now it's it's a little bigger now, but that's what
I got to try some Ski.
Yeah,
Ski, you have to.
Yeah.
You have to. All right, it's another week. We'll be back next week taking your questions on another week of Formed.